The words hit me like a freight train, their impact sending shockwaves through my body. I froze, my hand still clutching the coffee mug, knuckles turning white. Massive fraud scandal, implicated Hughes. My ears rang as I strained to make out the hushed conversation between the two surgeons huddled nearby. Hughes. Garrett Hughes, my estranged husband. Fragments of their discussion pierced through the din of the crowded conference hall lobby. Criminal charges, federal investigation, millions lost. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately wishing it were all a cruel misunderstanding. But deep down, a gnawing sense of truth clawed at my gut. Garrett had always been cavalier with ethics, bending rules to feed his insatiable ambition as a high-flying financial analyst. I'd turned a blind eye for too long, rationalizing his moral lapses as the cost of success, until they finally shattered our marriage beyond repair. My hands trembled as I gathered my things, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The constant business trips, the hushed phone calls, the blatant lies, they all reeked of guilt and deception now. As I hurried out, dodging clusters of colleagues, fury blazed within me. How could he? After everything, did he have no conscience? No thought for the consequences? For Elise? The thought of my 16-year-old daughter stopped me in my tracks. Sweet, innocent Elise, already grappling with the pressures of teenage life. This would devastate her. I clenched my fists, resolve steadying my nerves. Not this time, Garrett. I wouldn't let you inflict more pain on our family. My heels struck the pavement with newfound purpose as I stormed out of the hotel. I had to get to the bottom of this, for Elise's sake. And God help Garrett Hughes if the whispers proved true. I burst through the door of our upscale apartment, chest heaving. Garrett looked up from the sofa, his expression a portrait of nonchalance that I'd grown to despise. Lena, I didn't expect you back so. Cut the crap, Garrett, I snarled, thunder in my voice. What the hell have you done? His brows knitted in confusion. What are you talking about? The fraud scheme. I closed the distance between us, stabbing an accusatory finger into his chest. All those hushed meetings and shady dealings. I heard everything at the conference. His mask finally shattered, dread hollowing his eyes. Who told you? I recoiled, repulsed. So it's true? You lying, depraved bastard. Garrett's complexion turned ashen. Lena, please, let me explain. But I was done listening to his lies. Explain what? How you risked our lives, our daughter's future with your crooked greed? Drawing myself up, I met his pathetic gaze with steel. You're going to come clean, Garrett. To the authorities, to our daughter, to everyone. I won't let you put us through hell again. Jaw clenched, I turned on my heel and strode out, each step fortifying my resolve. The monster of deception I'd unknowingly married was unraveling, and this time I would be the one delivering justice. I stormed back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. Garrett was slumped on the sofa, head in his hands. He looked up at the sound, eyes bloodshot. You're back, he croaked out. Don't act so surprised, I spat. Did you really think I'd just slink away after your despicable betrayal? Garrett rose warily. Lena, please. You have no idea what I've been going through. My hands balled into fists. Oh, I think I have a damn good idea, thanks to those whispers at the conference. I never meant to. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. Things just spiraled so quickly. My temper flared. You think that's an excuse? What for I'm going to say next? You got caught up in the thrill of deception? An uneasy silence stretched between us, thick with lingering resentment. Finally he spoke in a hoarse whisper. They're ruined, Lena. All my clients, my reputation. He met my glare with a haunted look. I'm facing financial oblivion and possibly criminal charges. In that moment, a part of me almost pitied him, the shadow of the confident, silver-tongued man I'd once loved now reduced to this desperate husk. Almost. I stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. That's nowhere near the hell you've put our daughter and me through. Hurt flickered across his face, rapidly engulfed by shame. Good. He deserved to drown in it. My mind raced back to that night years ago, the fateful argument that shattered our marriage vows. Uncovered lies about money, infidelity, broken promises. I'd wept until I could cry no more. And through it all, Garrett remained coldly indifferent, consumed by greed and carnal desires. That night, I vowed our daughter Elise would never have to suffer the anguish I did over her father's moral failings. But now here I stood, the old wounds reopened and bleeding anew, White-hot rage roiled in my chest like lava. When were you planning to tell me, Garrett? Or Elise? I hissed through gritted teeth. He grimaced like a cornered rat. I don't know. I thought I could fix this before. My palm whipped across his cheek with a resounding crack. Garrett reeled back, stunned. Don't you dare invoke our daughter's name with your wretched lies, I snarled. Not after you jeopardized everything we have, everything I sacrificed my career for. I loomed over him, trembling with fury. She worships you, Garrett. How could you put her through such anguish again? Shame and guilt contorted his features, but I felt no sympathy, just disgust at his moral cowardice. He was the personification of every fear that kept me up at night, dreading the day his deceit resurfaced to torment our little girl. Suddenly, Garrett seemed to crumple under my withering glare. I watched him passively as he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, shoulders heaving. I stood rooted for a long moment, then turned and strode out without a backwards glance. The first tears streamed down my cheeks as the magnitude of his latest betrayal hit home. I would protect Elise, no matter what inner demons I had to confront from our shattered past. I found Elise hunched over her laptop at the kitchen counter, fingers furiously tapping away. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she navigated the storm of teenage life. "Hi, honey," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay?" Elise looked up with a weary smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, just working on this stupid group project." I winced inwardly at her haggard expression, the telltale signs of adolescent stress etched into her young features. If only I could shield her from such burdens. Fighting the urge to pull her into a warm embrace, I gestured to the laptop screen. "What's the project about?" "Environmental science," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're analyzing the ecological impacts of commercial farming, but my partners keep blowing off meetings and missing deadlines." My heart ached to see her so overwhelmed. Elise had always been a diligent student, meticulously completing assignments well before they were due. But these past few months, the workload seemed to be taking a heavy toll. "I'm so sorry, Elle. That's really unfair to you." She shrugged listlessly. "It's whatever. I'm used to carrying the load at this point." Those words cut deep, a brutal reminder that once again I'd failed to protect her from unnecessary hardship. Just like that night years ago when she overheard Garrett and I screaming at each other. Swallowing hard, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you take a break? We could watch a movie. Just the two of us." Elise hesitated, chewing her lip in that adorably pensive way she had since childhood. Finally, she spoke in a small voice that shattered my heart anew. Have you noticed people have been treating me differently lately?" My breath caught in my throat as she continued. "It's like they go out of their way to exclude me, whispering behind my back." She hugged her arms, suddenly looking so small and vulnerable. Did I do something wrong, Mom?" White-hot anger flared within me, aimed directly at the monstrous coward who'd brought such misery into our lives. I wanted nothing more than to rush over and enfold Elise in my arms, shielding her from this fresh betrayal. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Couldn't risk tainting her innocence before I fully grasped the serpentine depths of her father's transgressions. Suppressing my rage, I crossed over and placed my hands on her slender shoulders. "Listen to me, Elise," I said firmly. "You are the most kind-hearted, brilliant young woman I know, and anyone who treats you with anything less than respect doesn't deserve a second of your time or energy." She gazed up at me with those soulful eyes, silently pleading for reassurance and guidance. In that moment, I yearned to lay bare the sordid truth haunting our family once more. But I held my tongue, forcing a warm smile instead. "Trust me, honey, you haven't done anything wrong. Those people are just small-minded and intimidated by your spirit." I gently brushed a tendril of hair from her face. Bullies always lash out at the strong, the special ones who shine too brightly. Slowly, the tension drained from Elise's posture, her eyes regaining a spark of their familiar radiant self. "Thanks, Mom," she murmured, managing a small smile. I really needed to hear that." As she turned back to her work, I could no longer suppress the storm of conflicted emotions roiling within. Garrett would be made to answer for every one of Elise's tears, every shred of hardship he'd callously inflicted. My titanic quest for justice had only just begun. The next morning, I strode into my office at Mercy General with a renewed sense of purpose burning in my chest. I had to get to the bottom of Garrett's tangled web before it collapsed on our family. Sinking into my desk chair, I pulled up his name on my computer, grimly scanning the search results. Article after damning article detailed a shocking saga of fraud, deception, and shattered lives. Multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, offshore accounts, disgraced hedge fund manager. My stomach twisted as I read about investors and retirees left destitute, life savings siphoned away by Garrett's unquenchable greed. How could he have been so heartlessly reckless, so morally bankrupt? One particularly lurid piece caught my eye. An exposé from a local paper written by a journalist named Alexis Harmon. I vaguely recalled her as an up-and-coming reporter known for her uncompromising pursuit of the truth. Perhaps she could help unravel this sordid tangle. I quickly jotted down her contact details, resolving to reach out shortly. But first, one other avenue required exploring. I leaned back, worrying my lower lip as I typed out a familiar name, Malcolm Brooks. One of Garrett's closest colleagues during his heyday on Wall Street, Brooks had been disgraced a few years back in an insider trading scandal. He and Garrett had been thick as thieves until Brooks landed in prison while Garrett escaped culpability through dumb luck and clever maneuvering. If anyone had insight into the depravity Garrett was capable of, it was Malcolm. A short while later, my phone buzzed with a New York area code. Taking a steadying breath, I accepted the call. Malcolm Brooks speaking. Mr. Brooks, I said evenly. This is Lena Barkley, Garrett Hughes' wife. A momentary silence crackled over the line before he responded, surprise tinging his gruff tone. Well, isn't this a blast from the past? To what do I owe the pleasure, Mrs. Barkley? I paused, weighing my words carefully. I think you know exactly why I'm calling. Another beat of silence before a low, bitter chuckle. So you finally caught a glimpse of that worm's true colors, did you? Can't say I'm surprised. Garrett Hughes was always 2 shakes away from an ethical freefall. My breath caught in my throat at his venom-laced words, the pieces falling into sickening clarity. All those years ago, beneath my willful ignorance, I must have sensed Garrett's capacity for such monumental betrayal. That's what poisoned our relationship, our family, from the very start. I swallowed hard against the lump of guilt burning in my throat. Mr. Brooks, I need your help to undo the damage he's caused, for my daughter's sake. Walk me through everything you know. He made a low, scoffing noise. Of course, wouldn't want little Garrett Jr. growing up with Daddy's stench all over her. His cruel words lanced straight through me like jagged shards of ice, but I gritted my teeth, forcing my voice to remain steady. Please, Malcolm, I understand if you hate Garrett, but don't take that out on my child. She's completely innocent in all this. A tense pause stretched between us before he finally sighed, relenting. You're right. I apologize. That was uncalled for. I leaned forward, clutching the phone tightly. So you'll help me bring him down before anyone else gets hurt? Another weighted pause before he muttered. Yeah, I'll help you burn that snake straight to the ground. Spine ramrod straight, I listened with cold determination as Malcolm laid bare the full, sickening scope of Garrett's depravity. Breached ethics, illegal trades, hollowed out companies, and ruined lives littering his path like grisly roadkill. A white-hot mixture of rage, disgust, and bone-deep determination blazed within me by the time he finished. Garrett had hurt so many people, stolen their futures and sense of security through cold, calculated avarice. But I would be damned if he stole those things from Elise and me again. No more lies, no more running, no more hollow excuses. The time for my husband's reckoning had finally come. And I would be standing watch, clear-eyed and uncompromising when the hammer fell. You can't be serious, Mom. Elise gaped at me, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hurt. I steeled myself, fighting to keep my expression neutral. I'm afraid I am, honey. I reached across the kitchen table, gently grasping her hand. This is the only way to stop your father from inflicting more damage. She yanked her hand back, shaking her head vehemently. But going public like that? Dragging his name through the mud? He did this to himself, Elise. I fought to keep my voice steady against the growing tide of anguish welling within me. Your father's greed and selfishness put us in this position, not me. Elise shot up from her chair, whirling away with her arms hugged tightly across her chest, the universal gesture of wounded vulnerability. You always saw the worst in him, even when he was trying his best. Maybe that's why he felt like he couldn't come to us. The accusations sliced deep, dredging up years of unresolved guilt over the disintegration of our family unit. My fists clenched at my sides as I struggled against the urge to snap back in volatile defensiveness. This wasn't about me and Garrett. It was about protecting our daughter from being collateral damage in his crusade of lies. Drawing a steadying breath, I rose and crossed over to where she stood, trembling with her back towards me. "Elise, look at me." I pitched my voice in that soft maternal tone that never failed to soothe her troubles as a child. "You need to understand how dangerously far your father has gone this time." Slowly, achingly, she turned to face me, eyes glistening, lip quivering in a valiant struggle to maintain her composure. "All those people he's hurt, the lives he's ruined." I fought against the lump swelling in my own throat. "If I don't stop him now, we could lose everything. Our home, your college fund, my practice, everything we've worked so hard to build." A lone teardrop traced down Elise's porcelain cheek as the gravity of my words sank in. Wordlessly, I pulled her into a fierce embrace, cradling her head against my chest while she shuddered with muffled sobs. We stayed like that for countless moments, mother and daughter united against the maelstrom threatening to rip our family asunder once more. At last, Elise drew back, sniffling as she swiped at her damp cheeks. Her eyes still shone with unspeakable hurt, but now reflected a glimmer of dawning resolution. "Okay," she said in a small but steady voice. "If this is the only way to make Dad face the truth, I'm in." A fragile sense of hope bloomed in my chest, quickly tempered by lingering dread. "I wish there was another way, Elise. Truly I do. But your father crossed a line this time that can't be ignored or undone." Marshalling my own inner reserves of courage, I drew myself up to my full height. "We're going to work closely with my contacts, a tenacious reporter and one of your father's most embittered former colleagues. Together, we're going to systematically unravel and expose every sordid thread of his fraud to the public." Elise's expression hardened with grim determination, aging her well beyond her 16 years. "Then let's get to work on bringing Dad's crimes to light," she said in a steely tone that would have made me proud under any other circumstances. "No more lies. No more protecting the Garrett Hughes everyone thinks they know." She extended her hand in a symbolic gesture of familial solidarity. It's time he faced the consequences for who he really is. Our eyes locked, two affronted warriors bound by unbreakable blood and shared betrayal, vowing to settle an overdue personal reckoning. Squaring my shoulders, I grasped her hand in an unbreakable filial vice. Agreed. It's finally time for the world to meet the real Garrett Hughes. And on that fateful day, the wheels of my husband's inevitable downfall were finally set into irreversible motion. The rhythmic tapping of my foot matched the pounding of my pulse as I sat tensely watching the clock. Any minute now, Alexis Harmon's blistering exposé on Garrett's crimes would go live on the Hartford Chronicle's website. Elise shifted next to me on the sofa, her own restless energy bleeding through. A myriad of emotions flickered across her face: anger, sadness, trepidation. My heart ached to see the loss of her youthful innocence playing out so vividly. Squeezing her hand, I gave what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay, honey?" She managed a wan nod, lips pressed into a grim line. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, no doubt responding to yet another concerned message from a friend who'd inevitably seen the firestorm brewing on social media. Suddenly, my own phone rang, the call I'd been bracing for. Drawing a fortifying breath, I accepted and brought it to my ear. "It's done." Alexis Harmon's crisp voice sounded tinny but resolute. "The article just went live, complete with that paper trail from your source detailing every sordid dime Garrett pocketed illegally over the years." "Thank you, Alexis," I said, squeezing Elise's hand tighter. "You have no idea how much this means to us." "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "This is just the opening salvo. Brace yourselves. Garrett's world is about to go nuclear." No sooner had she spoken than my laptop pinged with a new email notification. The subject line alone was enough to drain my face of all remaining color. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes orchestrated a $120 million Ponzi scheme. I drew a shuddering breath as the damning article's contents filled the screen. A masterfully crafted tapestry of cold, irrefutable facts meticulously unraveling my husband's litany of securities fraud, embezzlement, and brazen deception. Elise peered over, hand flying to muffle a horrified gasp as she digested the sheer enormity of Garrett's treachery. Of how his unchecked avarice had defrauded innocent pensioners of their life savings and irreparably shattered the finances of countless households, all while he lived in unrepentant opulence, utterly devoid of conscience. "Oh my God," she choked out, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. "All those people, how could he?" My own grief and revulsion warred with a perverse sense of grim vindication. For far too long, Garrett's fortress of lies had tainted and contaminated those he claimed to love most. Now, at long last, the floodgates had finally burst open, a searing light shining upon the bottomless pit of deceit and moral bankruptcy he'd chosen to wallow in. Clutching my daughter's trembling form, I could only watch numbly as the first furious reactions began rolling in. Outraged tweets and Facebook rants from defrauded victims and scandalized observers alike. One particularly visceral comment seared itself into my memory. "Garrett Hughes is a vile, avaricious monster who deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his miserable life." Far from objecting, I found myself silently agreeing. How could I not, after laying my eyes upon the full, grotesque tapestry of my husband's perfidy? The shattered futures, ruined families, and trail of lives callously discarded in his rapacious wake. For so long, I deluded myself into believing I could redeem the shadowed remnants of the man I once loved. That faint glimmers of decency still resided within Garrett's withered soul. But confronted with such nightmarish evidence of his depravity, I realized I'd been clinging to a fantasy, a desperate mirage of the husband and father he should have been. The truth was more brutal, more horrifically absolute. Garrett Hughes was a pathological con man without a shred of empathy or remorse, and he needed to be stopped before his poison seeped into any more innocent lives. The reckoning was nigh. As the first bombshell detonated across the mediascape, I could only steel my resolve for the seismic upheavals still to come. No more turning away, no more deluding myself about second chances, only hard truths and the personal justice I'd fought so hard to deliver. The pounding on the front door echoed through the apartment like a judge's gavel. Elise and I exchanged a loaded glance, her eyes still rimmed with red from the night's endless tears. "Stay here," I murmured, rising to my feet on legs that trembled ever so slightly. With a fortifying breath, I crossed over and pulled open the door. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals stood on the other side, badges glinting in the dim hallway light. "Mrs. Lena Barkley?" the taller one asked in a flat, no-nonsense tone. I lifted my chin, anger and vindication warring within me. "That's me. I assume you're here about my husband, Garrett Hughes?" "We have a federal warrant for his arrest," the second marshal stated, brandishing a sheaf of papers. "Our sources indicate he was last seen at this residence. Where is he?" An icy chill lanced through me, not of fear, but of sheer disgust that Garrett would potentially use our home as a refuge after his sickening criminal acts were laid bare. Grinding my teeth, I jerked my head towards the hallway. "See for yourselves." The two men brushed past me, fanning out with practiced efficiency. One whistled sharply as they entered the living area, his partner quickly taking up a defensive stance. "Target sighted." I followed their gaze to the corner of the room, and felt a swell of revulsion crest within me. There sat the disgraced shadow of my husband, slumped against the wall in his silk bathrobe and stained undershirt, an open bottle of gin clutched in his trembling hands. Garrett squinted blearily up at the approaching marshals, a pathetic, disheveled mockery of the suave, confident operator he'd once fancied himself. As they hauled him to his feet, the unmistakable reek of sour booze and failure assaulted my nostrils. "Garrett William Hughes," the first marshal barked, slapping cuffs around his limp wrists. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny charges. You have the right to remain silent." Elise emerged from the hallway, eyes blazing with equal parts loathing and raw hurt as she took in her fallen father's pathetic state. "Mom," she whispered from the corner of her mouth, sounding almost childlike. "Was this really necessary, parading him out like some common criminal?" Another wave of anger swelled in my breast. this one tinged with protectiveness over my daughter's lingering innocence. With 3 long strides, I crossed over to stand mere inches from Garrett's sagging, swaying form. "Look at her," I spat, jabbing a finger towards Elise's stricken face. "Look at the anguish you've put this beautiful girl through, you selfish bastard." His head lolled up, bloodshot eyes struggling to focus on our enraged features. "Lilina? Elise? I?" "Save it, Garrett," I snarled, revolted by his meager attempt at drunken contrition. "We don't want to hear any more of your lies." Elise stepped forward then, every ounce of her petite frame radiating white-hot fury. "Do you have any idea how many people's lives you destroyed, all for a bigger penthouse and sports cars?" Her voice dripped with caustic venom. "You're a pathetically greedy, soulless husk of a human being." Garrett recoiled as if struck, the haze of inebriation doing nothing to mask the spasm of naked shame contorting his features. But it wasn't remotely enough to temper the flames of disgust consuming me from the inside out. "You're right, Elise," I seethed, unable to tear my disgusted glare from his slack, pitiful visage. "He doesn't deserve a single ounce more of our anguish or tears." Straightening my spine, I fixed him with eyes of purest ice. "Take him away, officers, and if I never have to lay eyes on this wretched, morally bankrupt husk again, it'll be too soon." As the marshals wrestled the handcuffed Garrett towards the door, our splintered family's legacy of generational trauma festered in the air between us, like an open wound. Gathering Elise into a protective embrace, I watched with a heady swirl of sadness, rage, and grim resolve as my husband was hauled away towards the harsh judgment he'd so ruthlessly courted. There would be no more lies, no more hollow platitudes, or desperate 11th-hour appeals for forgiveness. Only the cold and bitter fruit born of his voracious avarice. As the door swung shut behind Garrett Hughes, severing him from our lives forever, a solitary thought echoed through my mind. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served. 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, bathing the room in a warm, rejuvenating glow. I sipped my coffee, savoring the rich aroma and tranquil silence. So much had changed, yet it felt like lifting a crushing weight from my shoulders. The financial fallout from Garrett's crimes had been severe. Between the court-ordered restitutions and legal fees, our prosperous lifestyle quickly became a memory. But I didn't lament its passing, not when I finally felt liberated from his toxic legacy. Elise's footsteps padded into the kitchen, shattering the fragile quiet. Her eyes were puffy from another night of processing the seismic shifts in our lives. But a small, peaceful smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Morning, Mom." I returned the smile, chest swelling with maternal pride. "Good morning, sweetheart." Gesturing to the stack of college brochures scattered across the table, I arched an eyebrow. "Anything catching your eye?" Elise sank into the chair opposite me, worrying her lower lip in that familiar pensive way. "A few possibilities. The scholarship money definitely helps expand my options." My heart clenched, guilt rapidly dousing the warm glow. If not for Garrett's catastrophic greed, Elise's application process wouldn't be weighed down by such pragmatism. "Honey, I'm so sorry you even have to worry about." "Stop," she cut me off firmly, that fierce spark shining through once more. "What's done is done, remember? We're not going to keep torturing ourselves over Dad's mistakes." I blinked, caught off guard by her adamant maturity. When had my little girl grown into such a resilient, self-possessed young woman? Reaching across the table, I gave her hand an affectionate squeeze. "You're right. We've finally exorcised that demon from our lives. No more looking back." Elise squeezed back, her warm smile broadening. "Exactly. We've got a fresh start ahead. Just you and me, Mom. Like it's always been." My breath hitched at the swell of emotions rushing through me. She was right. Through all the tumult and betrayal, our bond had remained unbreakable, an indomitable constant. No matter how deeply Garrett's deceit had burrowed, he could never extinguish the profound, unconditional love between a mother and her daughter. Nodding fiercely, I blinked back nascent tears of gratitude and release. "You and me against the world, kiddo. Always and forever." Elise's radiant smile was all the assurance I needed that we'd persevere, stronger, wiser, and steeled against any future maelstroms life might hurl our way. Because that unshakable foundation of love and trust was one pillar Garrett Hughes could never hope to crumble, no matter how greedily he indulged his worst impulses. With a contented sigh, I rose and began gathering our dishes, basking in the tender domestic ritual. The path ahead was rife with challenges, to be sure, but also brimming with possibilities neither of us could scarcely imagine yet. One thing was certain: the shackles of lies and moral cowardice had finally been shattered. Elise and I were free to author our own story on our own unbending terms. A sudden notification from my laptop caught my eye. I moved over and felt my eyebrows climb as the latest breaking news headline flashed across the screen. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for orchestrating $120 million Ponzi scheme. A heaviness seemed to lift from my very soul as the words sank in. At long last, the ultimate cosmic arbitration had been delivered. Garrett's insidious misdeeds would no longer corrupt and metastasize in the shadows. He alone would answer for the countless lives he'd callously upended in pursuit of ill-gotten fortunes. Poetic justice, whether he was spiritually capable of appreciating it or not. Elise peered over my shoulder at the screen, her unburdened expression hardening into one of cool stoicism. Without a word, she reached past me and emphatically closed the laptop, shutting out her father's sins like a swiftly banished ghost. Our eyes met, shining with mutual catharsis. Betrayal and trauma had bent but not broken us. If anything, the lacerating trials had galvanized our resilience into an indestructible foundation to build anew. As a fresh wave of morning sunlight washed over us, I made a silent vow to ensure the remaining years of Elise's childhood would be swaddled in unconditional warmth, wisdom, and renewed family bonds. Crossing the space between us, I pulled my daughter into a fierce, lingering embrace. When we at last parted, our faces reflected brilliant mirrors of steadfast love and hope for the future shimmering just over the horizon. For while Garrett Hughes's karmic path ended in a prison cell, ours continued to hell. Ever onward, uplifting, inspiring, and blazing towards brilliant new horizons of our own authoring.
My marriage and my family's expectations are at the center of a challenging circumstance that I'm now going through. My spouse's and his mother's unrelenting pursuit of wealth seems to be overshadowing my opportunity to inherit what I am legally due. You might think that if we get married, inheriting something from your own family would be easy. But for me, that's starting to feel like a pipe dream. My spouse and his mother have a strong financial obsession. They've come to the point where they even want to claim the hard-won heritage of my late father, which is something I can never forgive. My resolve only gets stronger every day. I'm resolved to resist their overwhelming greed. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kathy, and I'm 40 years old. I've been married for 14 years and have a hard career on top of that. Henry, my 42-year-old husband, works at a grocery close to the station, which is where our paths initially crossed when I was attending college. When I was working part-time at that exact supermarket, we began dating casually. When I was 23, we were married. Our son Liam, who enrolled in college this spring, has finally joined our family. Despite my dedication to completing my duties, Henry's careless spending tendencies are a concerning aspect of my existence. He is free to spend our hard-earned money, but his persistent requests for additional funding and his lack of openness have only made things more difficult for us financially. When it comes to talking money, especially with his parents there, the environment becomes combative. My refusal to comply with their incessant requests frequently results in severe resistance from them. My son Liam completely agrees that when his grandparents arrive, things usually seem to get tense. In fact, Liam frequently decides to avoid them. But Liam just dropped a bombshell that made an already tense situation even more stressful. He discovered his father's adultery. I was more devastated than angry when I learned this. But Liam's encouragement gave me the courage to think about talking to my husband before making any big choices. While I was collecting my ideas about how to handle this sensitive matter, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Suddenly, my husband and his parents were in our living room. My spouse quietly mentioned that he needed $8,000 for the plan, which led to what seemed to be a simple visit turning into an expensive trip to Hawaii. I became so enraged that I took advantage of the opportunity to confront them about my husband's infidelity, as well as their unrelenting requests for money. The seriousness of my charge set in, and the room became silent. My spouse initially disputed everything, questioned the need for evidence, and maintained his innocence when I confronted him about his affair. In response, I informed him that he had been spotted leaving a hotel with a different woman. He attempted to undermine the witness, our own kid, which caused me to hesitate since I didn't want to involve Liam in a clumsy altercation. My mother-in-law surprised me by downplaying how serious the infidelity was and implying that this kind of behavior is normal and should be ignored. That she, a woman herself, could brush off such behavior with such indifference horrified me. As if the personal betrayal was only a minor diversion, the conversation swiftly returned to their financial request for the Hawaii trip, despite the emotional pain. I realized it was time to dissolve our marriage because I was becoming increasingly frustrated with my husband's lack of moral awareness and our continual money arguments. I announced that we were divorcing in a cool, collected, yet strong voice. My spouse swiftly threatened to seize my parents' estate in the event that we went through with the divorce as payback. My cell phone rang as our debate grew more heated, breaking the tension for a time. It was my father's brother, my uncle, and he had some upsetting news. After collapsing and becoming unconscious, my father was taken by ambulance to the hospital. Before I hurried to the hospital, I briefly informed my husband's parents about the dire situation. Though not in the best of condition, I was relieved to find my father stable upon arriving. He was 62 years old and had devoted his life to our family business, working long hours to make sure we were well off. I was shocked to learn of his unexpected health issue and was forced to reflect on his priceless contribution to my life. My father regained consciousness a few days later, which eased some of my immediate concerns. My son Liam and I had a moment of relief and concern together during a visit. But a follow-up call from the physician verified the seriousness of my father's illness, which had been made worse by years of overwork. Sadly, he died soon after, and I was overcome with sadness. Liam was my constant source of comfort during this difficult time. Being the only kid, I had to take charge of planning the funeral, which was made more challenging by my husband's lack of interest. My in-laws attended the burial, showing a tactless curiosity about the family home's value and a shallow admiration for it. Following the memorial services, my in-laws surprised us with a visit while I was still processing the loss of my father. In spite of the situation, their attention was regrettably drawn to the more materialistic elements. My mother-in-law was especially preoccupied with the opulence of the home, highlighting their continued insensitivity and materialism in the wake of our family's loss. I was putting funeral clothes away and trying to work through my grief when I got a phone saying my parents were suddenly coming to visit. Feeling a little confused and uneasy, I couldn't help but wonder why they were there. My anxiety mounted, anticipating yet another discussion centered around money matters. I was ready to have a meaningful talk with them when they arrived, resolute to grasp their motives. The atmosphere changed as they entered. Having followed along, my in-laws smiled contentedly as they sat down on the couch. When my husband suddenly offered that we move out of our large house and that his parents come in with us in a new one, the anxiety increased. Startled by this proposal, I reiterated that I had made the decision to move forward with the divorce because I had to take care of my deceased father's affairs. disregarding the facts of his adultery and our approaching divorce, my husband casually demanded that we split everything we owned, including my inheritance, as a married couple. I was enraged by this audacious demand, supposing entitlement to my entire fortune. I was even more irritated when his parents began to casually debate which room they would want in the possible new mansion. Determined to protect the legacy that my father had worked so hard to build, I vowed never to let them have their way. The audacity of my husband and his parents treating my father's house and wealth as if it were rightfully theirs had stretched my patience to its limits. A few days later, amidst these tumultuous events, I received a call from my uncle. His comforting words and support reassured me that I was handling the situation well despite the overwhelming challenges. The conversation with my uncle took an unexpected turn when he mentioned he had some urgent news to share, prompting us to arrange a meeting that very night. As he revealed shocking details about my husband and his parents, I was stunned by the gravity of the information. Determined to find a way forward, I confided in him about the outrageous demands and claims made by my in-laws. Outraged by their boldness, my uncle reassured me that he would help manage the situation. Curious about his approach, I eagerly met with him the next day, bringing along my son Liam. The plan was to enlighten Liam about the true nature of his father and grandparents and to prepare him for the difficult times ahead. Armed with this new strategy, I called my in-laws over for a discussion about potentially all 6 of us living together in my family home. The proposal seemed to catch everyone off guard, but after they realized we were serious, my mother-in-law quickly warmed up to the idea, excited at the prospect of living in what she called a dreamlike mansion. However, the excitement was short-lived. Reality hit when my father-in-law brought up the cancellation fee for their previously planned trip, demanding reimbursement. Their unabashed self-interest was glaring, and I was appalled by their audacity. Yet, my mother-in-law, unfazed, assured everyone that they would manage the finances soon enough, brushing aside any immediate concerns. Having dealt with my husband and in-laws' relentless pursuit of money for so long, I had become somewhat numb to their schemes. But this time their sheer selfishness struck a deeper chord, reminding me of the challenging road ahead in standing up to their manipulative tactics. However, Liam, who wasn't used to their blatant and greedy behavior, was clearly upset and angered by their audacity. To comfort him, I gently patted his shoulder and assured him that we would manage the situation together. As the conversation continued about the possibility of moving into my family home, I decided to play along, fully aware that their expectations were far from reality. Henry, my husband, probed into the logistics of the move, his tone unusually sharp. Trying to ease the tension, I explained that Liam and I would head over first to get the house ready, emphasizing that it was a substantial task and we needed to start early. However, Henry expressed doubt about Liam's ability to handle such responsibilities, given his student status. I skillfully steered the conversation, assuring him that Liam was more than capable of managing his tasks. Although Henry remained somewhat skeptical over trivial issues, despite the tension, my mother-in-law was cheerfully oblivious to the undercurrents. The conversation soon drifted to the size of the mansion and the number of rooms, which seemed to excite her. Seizing this chance, I told them they could choose their rooms first, and even suggested a gradual approach to cleaning and organizing, considering my busy work schedule. My measured responses served to temporarily satisfy their expectations, leaving them pleased with what they perceived as a victory. In my mind, I harbored a plan to challenge their presumptions and bring their lofty expectations back to earth. The moving day was scheduled a month later, giving me some time to strategize and perhaps change the course of events to better align with reality and fairness. I was filled with a mix of anticipation and determination as the decisive day approached. The day when my husband and in-laws were expected to arrive with a moving truck, believing they were about to take possession of what they thought was their new home. Liam and I stood at the front entrance, ready to meet them. Ignoring my husband's attempt at humor, I noticed the sparkles of excitement in my in-laws' eyes, oblivious to the fact that their illusions were about to be shattered. As the gate swung open, my uncle, my father's brother, stepped out of the house. His presence was silent yet imposing. He confronted my husband and in-laws, leaving them puzzled. It was clear that my husband barely remembered my uncle from the funeral. Setting the record straight, my uncle asserted his ownership of the house and clarified the details of the inheritance distribution. The shock on my husband and in-laws' faces was evident as they came to terms with the gravity of their misunderstanding. Despite my uncle's assertive explanations, my husband tried to remain calm, seemingly attempting to gloss over the confrontation. However, the tension escalated when Liam stepped in, accusing his father of infidelity. This revelation left my husband visibly shaken and exposed, unable to deny the truth his son had unveiled about him being seen entering a hotel with another woman's suspicion I had harbored was now confirmed. When confronted, my husband adamantly denied the accusations, refusing to admit to his wrongdoings. Liam, distressed by his father's actions and their impact on our family, urged his father to leave our lives for good. Despite this emotional plea, my in-laws were still primarily focused on financial matters, insisting on a formal division of property. Their indifference to the personal agony they were causing was highlighted by the striking contrast between our family's emotional turmoil and their unwavering pursuit of financial gain. I was completely shocked to hear that my in-laws had resigned their jobs and given up their flat in order to enjoy a relaxed lifestyle at what they believed to be the family mansion. The revelation that my spouse and father-in-law had quit their employment and intended to live off of what they thought would be their portion of my father's estate made it even more shocking. Perplexed by their snap judgments and conceited demands, I remained steadfast, claiming my legitimate inheritance as my father's daughter and expecting a just distribution of his vast assets. Luckily, my uncle took over to handle the legal parts as he too was a lawyer. Supported by substantial evidence obtained over the course of a month-long inquiry, he exposed my husband's adultery. My spouse's parents were taken aback by this revelation, which ultimately caused them to acknowledge the seriousness of their errors of judgment. I told them, with my uncle's help, that we would have to take legal action for any more conversations and that they could never get in touch with me again. My husband gave them a short, threatening glance, but they left without any more problems. I conveyed my sincere appreciation to my uncle for his invaluable assistance. My father and grandfather's desires were fulfilled when my son Liam and I moved into the family home after the court case. I was incredibly appreciative of the chance to live in a home full of treasured memories. Liam committed himself to his studies in order to become a successful lawyer, motivated by his uncle's example. In the meantime, my ex-husband's parents went through a difficult period of unemployment, moving into an outdated apartment. As my ex-husband, who was now experiencing financial hardship, asked for assistance, the consequences of their conduct started to become apparent. But now that we were totally cut off, I refused to give them any money, which made us even more distant. Their prior plan to finance a luxurious trip that never happened fell apart even more, revealing the depth of their deception as my ex-husband struggled to adapt to his new reality of working day jobs and part-time hours. Freed from these obligations, I concentrated on my work and excitedly anticipated Liam's college graduation. Glad to have overcome such major obstacles, I was eager to turn a new page in my life. My name is Jenna, and I recently got married at the age of 29. Bobby, my 31-year-old spouse, works at an office. Our tale changed when Bobby chose to bring his younger sister, Doris, into our just-purchased house without consulting us first. This is a $500,000 home that was custom-built for us as newlyweds. Bobby and I were highly active in the design and decorating of our home from the moment we were engaged, ready to move in as soon as possible following our marriage. The first thing that struck me when I moved in was how much Bobby had. Perplexed, I asked, "Bobby, is there enough space for everything? It appears to be quite a bit." With a hint of scandal, he said, "Oh, did I not mention? Doris will be residing with us." I questioned, completely taken aback. Why would Doris move in now? We recently tied the knot. Bobby brushed off my worries, saying, "It's not a big problem. Since Doris is also family, cohabiting shouldn't present any issues for either of us. She desires to remain in the newly acquired home." I protested, emphasizing that there had been no prior conversation, but Bobby disregarded me and carried on unpacking. He became so antagonistic that he even yelled, "You can go if you don't like it. Doris will remain. I've already decided, so quit whining." I was not persuaded at all, and I even threatened to ask my brother for help. Bobby retreated swiftly, fearing a confrontation. "Hold off, I'm calling him. Look, this won't be Doris's last visit. All she needs is a place to stay while she looks for work and a place of her own. Are you able to comprehend that?" I nodded reluctantly and said, "All right, but is Doris allowed to stay in the guest room?" Bobby paused, then said, Yeah. But it was obvious that he was unsure of himself. We were toasting to our relocation after a hectic day of unpacking and putting Doris's possessions into the guest room when the doorbell rang late at night. Bobby hastened to respond, curious. It was Doris, much to my dismay. I was in the kitchen getting ready for bed, and not feeling friendly when Bobby said, "Hey Jenna, Doris is here." I said, attempting to hide my irritation, "Hello Doris. Why are you here at this late hour? Can I come home whenever I want now?" Doris brashly retorted, "Big bro, show me my room. It's quite spacious." "This isn't the right room," she protested as soon as she led Bobby to the guest room. "Did you not say that it was larger?" Then she ran upstairs, looking for a different room. I followed them and was appalled to see Doris claiming my assigned workspace as her own. I became quite irritated and said, "This is my workroom," raising my voice. "Your room isn't ready yet." "Why not make this Doris's room?" Bobby interrupted. The sanctity of our newlywed house and marriage was being threatened by the rapidly worsening circumstances. I forcefully refused to back down, saying, "No way." In an attempt to reach a middle ground, I proposed Bobby's assigned workstation, the room next door, which was also very large. I gestured to it, but Bobby seemed clearly upset. "That room is not it. I've been eager to put it to use. In fact, I chose the wallpaper myself." Not at all. We were now utilizing the future children's room as a guest room, and it seemed to be the only other option. Still not happy, Doris angrily yelled at me, "You really are a bit of a brat, don't you?" Not paying attention to the household leader. Quite naughty considering that she depends on him for food. Her accusation left me tired and depressed, and I asked myself, who's the real freeloader here? I went back to the living room to continue enjoying our move on my own. I ignored their arguments until Bobby addressed me and said, "You're always opposing me, acting all high and mighty." I could hear them shouting from there. "If you can't listen to me, get out," he said as he grabbed the wine bottle and took a big swallow. "In this household, I am the head. Never undervalue me." He then bounded off with Doris. I decided to call my brother despite the fact that it was late and I was feeling stressed. He responded right away, sounding irritated. "Hey, are you crazy? Did you get any sleep?" I apologized for my inquiry. I had called, it turned out, while he and his wife were having a fight. About the timing, he half-joked, saying, "What's up? Did everything go according to plan during the move? I'm sorry not being there. Isn't it done now? You should talk to your wife, don't you? Should I just leave her in this state?" When I started telling my brother about how Doris had moved in from day one, how she didn't want the guest room, and how my brother and Doris were treating me, he became concerned that I was being treated in a way that resembled a servant. I dismissed his concerns with a joke and said, "You do realize that I'm your sister? Me, a helper? Let them try if they believe they can handle that." "Good point, but call me if anything happens," my brother jokes. Then we started talking about his problems. When I found out his wife was having an affair and visiting other guys she met on a dating site, I was astonished. She had accidentally sent him a note intended for her partner, which is how he found out. After obtaining evidence, Bobby, who had been doubting her for some time, took her phone and returned her to her parents. The following day, he was going to her parents' house to talk about everything. We acknowledged that we were both in difficult circumstances and agreed to keep in touch as we closed our conversation. I hung up and busied myself unpacking the rest of the boxes while I waited for Bobby and Doris to come back. They returned late at night, merry and inebriated. Tension rising, I unpacked anyhow, preparing myself to greet them. Bobby and Doris came up to me with what they considered to be an extremely clever solution. "We can each sleep in our workrooms if we shift our bedroom to Doris's. How do you feel? I think it's a great idea. Please make sure Doris has a room by tomorrow." After pausing, I answered, "Let me make one thing clear first. How much will Doris pay each month for groceries and home supplies? I take it that she does not intend to remain here indefinitely. What is her intended duration of stay?" Bobby gave my queries a nervous look. "You're asking Doris for money, but who doesn't work? You should not worry. I will pay for it out of my pay." With a tone of entitlement, Doris added, "I'll stay till I'm satisfied. My mom cooks in an outdated manner, and I detest her constant nagging about cleaning and laundry at home. I don't have to pay to do what I want here. It's flawless. Jenna, why don't you move out if you don't like it?" I snapped back, "Then let's divide the household expenses. I will cover my share with my income. You can use your salary for yourself and Doris." They seemed oddly pleased with this arrangement, even though I added, "And you'll need to take care of your chores." Feeling they weren't taking me seriously, I left a written note about our agreement. The next day, still concerned about my brother, I decided to visit him at his office. He had taken over as the president of a construction company after our father passed away last year. Surprised to see me, he invited me to speak. First, I explained the situation at home and asked if there might be a position for me at his company. "Our secretary is leaving due to her husband's relocation. It's good timing," he replied, agreeing to hire me. Then he shared his troubling news that left me stunned. His wife was pregnant, but it was clear the child wasn't his. The evidence was on her phone, filled with messages, photos, and videos of her lovers who now wanted to shirk responsibility upon learning of the pregnancy. When I asked if he was considering a divorce, he replied, "It will be tough for the kids, but I see no other option." I advised him to consult with a lawyer for a proper discussion. Returning home, I was haunted by the images and texts of my sister-in-law's affair. Despite knowing her as a loving, family-oriented person, her betrayal felt like losing a close friend. Tears welled up as I processed the shock. Amidst these thoughts, Doris persistently knocked on my door, breaking into my reverie with, "Hey, I'm hungry. Can you make something?" Doris's voice echoed through the door, but I was too shocked and drained to respond, so I let her be. Then my phone rang. It was my husband, likely calling from work. Anticipating the direction of the conversation, I chose not to answer. I just wasn't in the mood to talk. Shortly after, I received a text from my brother asking if I could accompany him to a lawyer the following day. I simply replied with an okay sticker and must have drifted off to sleep. I was abruptly awakened by my husband's loud voice. "You didn't even prepare food for Doris, and you're sleeping? What's that about?" he roared. Without a word, I just held up a written pledge we had made, signaling him to read it. Realizing the situation, he told Doris, "Let's let her sleep today. She seems off. We can talk about this tomorrow." "I'm not sick, just tired of this," I mumbled, rolling over to sleep again. The next morning, I quietly left the house without waking my husband and headed to my brother's place. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, with bloodshot eyes. Before anything, I helped get his kids ready and took them to kindergarten. During the drive, they shared that their parents had argued and their mom had left the house. Mommy was the bad one. She left us at home and went out. We cried because we were left alone. So Daddy got angry, they said innocently. I reassured them, "If you're lonely, call Auntie, okay?" Their cheerful yay made it clear they weren't too sad about their mom's absence. After dropping off the children, my brother and I went to see the lawyer. The lawyer confirmed that the evidence on my sister-in-law's phone, photos, videos, and messages, was more than sufficient for a divorce case and to argue for parental rights. After my brother shared his story, I also got a chance to discuss my situation. The lawyer offered some advice, and my brother dropped me back home. He mentioned he'd be gathering the family later to discuss the divorce. "If anything happens, give us a call. We're all here for you," he assured as he left. When I walked into the living room, the house was a complete mess. They had attempted to make breakfast, leaving the kitchen greasy and dishes strewn about. The sight was frustrating. I hesitated to clean up after them, debating whether to address the chaos. Just then, Doris appeared. "Where did you go without making breakfast?" "Bobby didn't eat anything and had to go to work hungry. Isn't it unacceptable to abandon household chores as a wife?" She confronted me. I responded firmly, "You know what? I'm not your maid or servant. Weren't you taught to clean up after yourself as a child?" Ignoring her repetitive complaints, I decided not to let her provocations affect me anymore. The situation at home needed a resolution, and I was determined to make sure everyone played their part responsibly. "But you're the wife," Doris retorted, as I stormed to my room, only to find that my belongings were gone and Doris's items had taken over my space. I was shocked and confused. I confronted her in the living room. "Did you go into my room? Your stuff is everywhere. What's going on?" With a smug look, Doris replied, "Oh, I've always loved your room. It fits my neat and cute image perfectly, don't you think? I moved your stuff into the guest room." Fuming, I hurried to the guest room, where I found my computer and belongings carelessly tossed aside. The disrespect was palpable, and my anger boiled over. This was beyond tolerable. A burning desire for retribution ignited within me, and I resolved never to let this slide. I planned to confront my husband, Bobby, the moment he returned home. I'd show him the chaos Doris had created and ask him, "Do you want to live like this, with Doris and me constantly at odds?" Bobby returned unexpectedly early, likely tipped off by Doris. I could hear his heavy footsteps approaching the guest room. It was clear he knew about the switch, and I braced myself for the worst. When Bobby burst through the door, his expression was fierce, with Doris grinning triumphantly by his side. "You went against Doris," he accused. "Aren't you my wife? Isn't it your job to look after me and your sister-in-law?" At that moment, any affection I held for Bobby evaporated. He stood there, not once defending me or acknowledging Doris's invasive behavior. No calls for her to move her stuff back, and no questions about why she was disregarding my personal space. Determined, I challenged him. "If this is how it's going to be, I'm inviting my brother over. He's never seen our house. Maybe it's time he does." Despite his usual apprehension about my brother, Bobby's demeanor changed with Doris beside him. "Are you sure about that? If you let that thug into our house, I'll kick you out," he threatened confidently. "So kick me out. Try it if you can. I'll call my mother, my brother, and his wife to see this place," I retorted, unflinching. His face hardened as he warned, "Do not dare call your family. If you don't like it, then leave." Then Doris interjected with a smirk, "This is my castle with Bobby. You know you have no right to call anyone here. Even if your family comes, we'll just kick them out." Unfazed, I grabbed my phone. "I'll call my brother then." To Bobby and Doris, I added, "Perhaps we should live apart. You two can have fun, invite your friends, and party all you want. Sounds like you prefer that." Their faces lit up at the idea, and Bobby even suggested, "Maybe we should just get divorced already." Fed up with their disrespect and unyielding attitude, I decided to make the call. It was time for my family to see firsthand the situation. I was dealing with the reality of our fractured relationship, which became starkly clear. But I was ready to take a stand as Bobby and Doris buzzed with high spirits, thrilled at the prospect of having the house to themselves and thinking of ejecting me. I calmly warned them, "All right, but you'll regret this. I'm calling my family now." I reached out to my brother, who responded eagerly, "We've been waiting for this. We're on our way." His readiness to jump into action moved me, showing his anticipation of my call. Within about 25 minutes, my family arrived. Doris, who had previously threatened to kick my family out, turned pale at the sight of my brother. "Oh, Doris, I thought you were going to kick out my family when they arrived," I remarked. She could only shake her head weakly in response. Seeing Doris so subdued, Bobby also seemed to shrink back in fear. My brother, a former judo competitor with a national ranking until a knee injury in college, stood imposingly over 6 feet tall with a buzz cut. Now coaching at a local boys' club, my younger brother, also a judo practitioner, mirrored his appearance. They had both been memorable figures at the wedding. "Huh, we're getting kicked out by who? Isn't it you guys who are leaving?" My elder brother laughed, to which Doris tried to muster some bravado. "Yeah, my brother is divorcing his useless wife now. Please leave," my younger brother retorted. What? You guys are the ones leaving, aren't you? This is Jenna's house, isn't it? Built with her share of our father's inheritance and in Jenna's name. While this unfolded, my mother began tidying up the kitchen and remarked, "Oh dear, what a mess." Then, calling out to my brothers, she said, "Don't drag out the conversation. Get to the point already." Taking her cue, my brothers turned to me. "Another person is coming. Let them in when they arrive," they instructed, while gesturing for Bobby and Doris to sit down. "We have two matters to discuss today. The first is that we need you to leave," my brother told my husband and Doris. When Doris incredulously asked if it was true that the house belonged to me, Bobby started to falter. "Well, I was talking to the contractors about the interior and stuff, so I thought it was my house. But maybe it's not. But I'm the head of the household, right?" It was clear he had misconstrued being the head of the household as ownership without considering the source of the funds. "You know that being the head of the household and being the owner of the house are two different things, right?" was the reply, leaving Bobby speechless. However, Doris stubbornly retorted, "I won't leave. Do you know about residency rights? I have rights, so I won't leave. If you don't want us here, you leave," glaring defiantly at me. "You seem to have researched this thoroughly, but this isn't a rental property, and you're not paying Jenna any rent, are you? So residency rights don't apply here," my brother pointed out. Bobby, sensing the gravity of the situation, began to resist their attempts to dismiss his claims. "But I'm married to Jenna, right? I can't just leave." "I won't separate," Bobby argued, clinging to his last shred of defense. Just then, the doorbell rang. The guests my brothers had mentioned had probably arrived. I opened the door to find my sister-in-law, my older brother's wife, standing there with tears streaming down her face. Before letting her into the house, I turned to my brother. "Your wife is here with your child. What should we do?" My mother, ever the peacemaker, suggested she would take the child to a room upstairs. After guiding them upstairs, I allowed my sister-in-law to enter the house. Bobby, caught off guard by her appearance, stammered, "How did you find out where we live? Please, just go home for today." Bobby's suspicious demeanor did not go unnoticed. My elder brother stepped in, his voice heavy with disdain. "Ha! Did you forget my wife's face? This is the second matter we need to discuss." The color drained from Bobby's face, a mix of confusion and fear taking hold as he mumbled, "You mean she?" It seemed Bobby hadn't realized she was my brother's wife. In a panic, he looked like he was about to flee, but was rooted to the spot. My brother, holding up evidence of the affair, confronted him. "Seems like my wife is pregnant with your child. Did you two plan this?" Throwing down the evidence on the table, he declared, "For me, it's divorce, nothing less." Hearing this, Doris, fearful of being caught in a scandal, blurted out, "I will pack my things and go back to my parents' house," and made a move to escape. Upstairs, my younger brother quickly stepped in. "We've got a truck loaded with boxes. Start packing your things right now. I'll get the boxes." Doris hesitated, asking, "Am I leaving today?" But one stern look from my brother made her relent. Meanwhile, my elder brother told his wife to sign the divorce papers as he handed them to her along with a pen. Seeing the custody section assigned to my brother, she hesitated, but he firmly told her, "That's what the kids want. Your opinion doesn't matter." With tears streaming down her face, she signed the papers. "Next time, take care of the child in your belly. I won't ask for child support in return. Don't ever show your face to my kids unless they want to see you." I won't stop them when they grow up, he stated, as she apologized to him on her knees. Watching this unfold, I realized the depth of pain my brother had been bearing. Then the focus shifted to me. So Jenna, what are you going to do? My elder brother asked. I responded without hesitation. I choose divorce too. I want him out of my house as soon as possible. At this, Bobby dropped to his knees, begging, I don't want a divorce. Please forgive me. I beg you. He then added desperately, besides, it could be his child, not mine. This only solidified my decision. I had seen enough deceit and was ready to reclaim my life and my home. Bobby was stunned to hear my brother say, I'm done having kids. I've had surgery to ensure that, with such composure. Then my brother gave me the divorce documents and said, have him sign these if you want him and Doris out of the house right now. I asked my husband to sign the documents, and he did so without much thought, possibly realizing there was no getting out of the mess he'd made. I gave him and Doris the pledge forms my lawyer had produced after he signed. These agreements forced them to promise never to return to my house and to pay me back for the almost $50,000 in damages they had caused. With his shoulders hunched, Bobby reluctantly signed the commitment under my brother's watchful eye, then trudged upstairs to start packing his things. In the meantime, my brother remarked, somewhat sarcastically, oh, I got a marriage license for you guys when I picked up the divorce papers. He gave it to his wife, who signed it and shoved it in Bobby's direction without thinking twice. Sign it right away. You must accept responsibility for the disaster you've made in my life. You can't just leave. I'm having this baby. Bobby signed the paper, looking frantic as he cried, just do whatever you want. Still not done, my brother pushed Bobby, saying, hey, you won't say anything unless I ask, huh? Are you lacking any words of wisdom for me? Bobby immediately apologized profusely for this, almost bending to the ground in regret. Together, we worked fast to pack Bobby and Doris's possessions into boxes and load them onto a waiting vehicle to be sent to their parents' home. So my short married existence ended abruptly, but firmly. My mother suggested selling her home so that she and my younger brother might move in together, as I was thinking about living alone in the large house. My elder brother made the decision to move in with his 4 kids and sell his own house. With the money from the sale of their property, they intended to purchase my house, jokingly proposing, why not build a new house when you get married next time? I'm good with an apartment, I persisted. We built a life full of joy and happiness together, even with the house's history of sad memories, and we obtained the dog that the kids had always wanted. 8 months later, my ex-husband weed my ex-sister-in-law and moved in with her at his parents' home. He had to put in a lot of overtime labor to make up for the harm they had done to my residence. She reached a breaking point and lost her mental equilibrium as a result of Doris treating her new sister-in-law like a maid. Eventually, Doris's mother sent her out because she could no longer stand to see her daughter in that state. In a desperate attempt to get assistance, Doris contacted my ex-husband, but he scornfully accused her, stating, we would still be residing in that mansion if you hadn't moved in. In sharp contrast to my own family's fresh start and cohesiveness, Doris ended herself alone, isolated, and without support. My mother-in-law was very clear that she did not welcome anyone into her home who did not want to help out around the house. She seemed to expect me to apologize, even feel a little regret. My spouse, meanwhile, was seated next her, a faint smile spreading across his lips as though he enjoyed watching me chastised. Quite the opposite of what they would have anticipated, I experienced a sudden calm wave. "After that, I'll head out," I said firmly and without hesitation. I made the decision at that point to stop worrying about their behavior and views. I realized that they would eventually have to face the consequences of their actions. Elizabeth is my name, and I'm 40 years old. I manage our home and a full-time career at the same time. The 3 adult children that my spouse Andrew and I have moved out to start their own lives. Originally, Andrew and I planned to spend this time together, but things changed when my mother-in-law moved in with us. She was widowed and in need of company. The calm dynamic that only Andrew and I shared at home was drastically changed by her arrival. Because of the rigorous nature of my work, I frequently have to stay at the office past 7:00 p.m. The scene that welcomes me home simply makes me feel more tired. There are frequently snacks and clothes all over the living room. Andrew, on the other hand, is barely recognizing my presence as he relaxes on the sofa with his beer and TV, seemingly unaware of the pandemonium around him. I'm left to take care of the kitchen chores alone because dinner isn't ready, and my dissatisfaction is getting worse by the minute. My mother-in-law frequently comes out of her room these evenings to chastise me, saying that my late nights and business travels are no justification for shirking my responsibilities at home. She calls me out for not being a good housewife and twists every little thing into a personal attack on my personality. I eventually discovered that reacting or attempting to defend myself just makes things worse. I've discovered that it's better to listen to her and wait for her to cool off. Even though it's far from perfect, this strategy keeps the peace, at least for the time being, and stops more arguments. I consider her critiques for a time before turning my focus back to making dinner. Her remarks hurt, but I keep going because I know she'll stop eventually. The response from my spouse, though, is more difficult to put up with. It appears that he enjoys witnessing my mother-in-law chastise me. Wives ought to value their spouses. She says, "You lack charm," a lot. And my husband laughs, echoing her, making fun of me while I lie at the dinner table. Not only is she the target of my wrath, but my husband's attitude is also getting to me. I beg them all the time to start supper without me, but they never do when I'm running late for work. They wait impassively for me to treat them like a servant when I eventually make it home. Since my mother-in-law moved in with us, things have gotten much worse in our house. My husband was a true partner before she came, helping out around the house, preparing meals when I was running late, and taking an active role in raising our children. However, he has since completely ceased helping and joined my mother-in-law in her criticisms. It's perplexing as well as annoying. She calls me inept and lazy, but she is the one who depends on us. Despite receiving money from her late spouse, she hasn't contributed monetarily. Instead, she wasted it on pleasures, quickly depleting her savings and even accruing debt. She resides with us almost rent-free these days. We had this conflict from the moment we moved in together. She said she would be thoughtful and even bowed low to demonstrate her sincerity. But only one day later she went back to her old habits and blamed me for not doing the cleaning. Her abrupt change was almost comical at first, but it soon became serious. She criticized not only my housekeeping, but also my professional responsibilities, calling me a bad wife for putting so much emphasis on my career. I attempted to clarify that occasionally my work requires late hours, but it didn't seem to register. I tried to explain, but my mother-in-law would not listen. Rather, as though it would be more appropriate, she recommended that I take a part-time work at the neighborhood grocery store. She was unaware of the practicalities of my profession, but she had a predetermined notion of what a daughter-in-law ought to be like. Living with her became increasingly challenging. Any dissatisfaction she had, like with our meal choices, would lead to complaints. Even simple routines like breakfast turned into issues. We used to grab bread or buy lunch, but she disapproved of these habits. Reluctantly, she started following our household rules, but not without constant grumbling. Dinner time became the focal point of contention. She insisted that it be served promptly at 7:00 p.m. with at least 3 side dishes and demanded that everyone eat together. She claimed this was what normal families did, but my work often kept me well past 7:00 p.m., making her demands impractical. Her rigid expectations clashed with the reality of my professional obligations, which were essential for our financial stability. She expressed doubts about my job's necessity, implying that my husband Andrew's salary ought to be adequate and that my work was more motivated by personal preference than by a need for money. I turned to Andrew for consolation, but he waved me off, saying I would finally learn my lesson. My fury was only heightened by his lack of defense. It appeared that he was comfortable portraying the empathetic, uncaring spouse who was unable to assist with home duties. This behavior infuriated me even more, because he immediately linked himself with my mother-in-law upon moving in, rather than standing by me. Since then, it seems like they are working together to treat me unfairly. My mother-in-law would always interrupt me when I tried to get Andrew to help with the housekeeping, saying that was the wife's job, and Andrew never questioned her. I was perplexed by this shift in dynamics because we used to work well together. After a while, I began to see a pattern. Andrew would smirk every time his mother gave me a hard time. I realized that maybe he didn't like that I made more money than he did, and that was why he could have been reluctant to help out around the house. I started to wonder about a lot of things in our relationship and how much had changed since his mother moved in with us when I came to this realization. Since he is typically viewed as the family provider, Andrew is unable to express his dissatisfaction, but I have a suspicion that he has been enjoying the arrangement from the start. After my mother-in-law came in, she publicly questioned if Andrew was actually the head of the family and regularly criticized my role in the home. When I was reprimanded, this seemed to give him a certain kind of satisfaction, exposing a part of my husband that I hadn't completely acknowledged before. After we moved in together, even after all these years, I had many nervous days wondering what to do. The mood had changed from one of peace to one of perpetual anxiety. My mother-in-law was a constant source of trouble, and Andrew was showing himself to be untrustworthy. Before she came, I hadn't felt the need to make any drastic decisions. One day, while I was out shopping, a neighbor approached me with a remark that caught me off guard. She suggested I should be more considerate towards my mother-in-law. Surprised, I asked her to elaborate. She confessed that she wasn't fond of her mother-in-law, but didn't consider herself inconsiderate. Then she revealed something unsettling. My mother-in-law had been talking about me. According to her, I neglected all housework. Our home was always a mess, and laundry was perpetually piled up. She claimed her rheumatism was worsening because she had to do chores herself since her son Andrew returned home late. Hearing how I was being portrayed was shocking, as a neglectful wife who relied on bread for every meal, leaving my mother-in-law to lament and complain. This narrative had begun to affect how people in our neighborhood viewed me. It became clear that the cold, less friendly reactions I was receiving were due to the stories my mother-in-law was spreading. Despite her small, frail appearance, she knew how to elicit sympathy from others, painting herself as a victim of a lazy daughter-in-law who shirked all household responsibilities. The neighbor's look was one of cold accusation, reflecting the impact of these harmful tales. Feeling a deep sense of embarrassment that our family issues had become neighborhood gossip, I murmured a denial and quickly returned home. As I entered the living room, I found my mother-in-law absorbed in her TV show, snacking away. "Please stop spreading rumors," I urged firmly. To my dismay, she just laughed and insisted, "But it's true." Something inside me reached its breaking point. If she was determined to persist in her falsehoods, then I would no longer uphold the pretense of a dutiful daughter-in-law. The very next day, after returning from work, I was met with the usual demands for dinner this time. However, I bypassed my husband and mother-in-law's complaints, went straight to the kitchen, and prepared just a single serving of instant ramen for myself. Seeing this, my mother-in-law's face turned a shade of crimson, her protest growing louder. "So you're just proving you're the worst daughter-in-law? Not doing any housework, huh? Fine, if that's the way you want to be," she declared angrily. As I quietly enjoyed my noodles, she was left speechless, eventually turning to my husband seeking his support. When he approached me, I laid out the whole situation. "Mom's been telling everyone that I'm a terrible daughter-in-law who neglects the housework." When I confronted her, she doubled down on her claims. "So I've decided to just stop doing it altogether. I'm only doing what she's been telling everyone." I shared the encounter with the neighbor from the previous day. My husband, looking concerned, tried to mediate. "Mom probably just exaggerated. Don't be so stubborn," he suggested. Despite his mother clearly being in the wrong, he still sided with her. Exhausted, and without the energy to argue further, I discarded the empty ramen cup, ignored his pleas, and retreated to the bathroom. There, I did my laundry and took a bath in solitude. As I soaked, a wave of relief washed over me. It became clear that regardless of my efforts, I was always going to be labeled as the bad wife. From that moment on, I decided to stop engaging in the household tasks my mother-in-law complained about. She bemoaned the lack of freshly baked bread for breakfast on my days off, but I remained steadfast in my new resolve. When I woke up and stepped into the living room, my mother-in-law demanded that I go out and buy bread immediately. In response, I retorted, "Why don't you buy it yourself? I'm such a bad wife. I'll only buy my share from now on. You'll need to pay for your food or handle it yourself." With that, I ignored her protests, made myself coffee, and quickly ate my bread. As I watched her reaction, a part of me worried that I might have been too harsh, but considering all I had endured, it felt justified. After finishing my breakfast, I tidied only my part of the cluttered living room and settled down with a book. The calm was soon interrupted by the doorbell. Glancing at the monitor, I saw a group of more than 4 elderly people, all familiar faces, standing there with visibly upset expressions. Confused, I watched as my mother-in-law rushed to greet them. They filed in one after the other, and I was taken aback when one of them berated me. "I hear you're the wicked woman who doesn't even care for her mother-in-law." These visitors were my mother-in-law's siblings and their spouses. She had spread false tales of mistreatment, accusing me of not feeding her properly and not allowing her to bathe, pleading for their intervention. Being the youngest of 4 with 3 elder siblings, she had a significant support network. Now, with spouses included, there were 8 elderly people in my living room labeling me as some kind of demon wife deserving of retribution. Their accusations made me break out in a cold sweat from fear. "This is a misunderstanding," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. But then the eldest brother raised his voice, pounded his cane on the floor, and yelled, Stop making excuses." The others joined him, demanding that I apologize and reflect on my supposed misdeed. Just then, my husband arrived, drawn by the noise. When my mother-in-law's brother turned to criticize my upbringing, my husband didn't defend me. Instead, he joined in the criticism, adding to the chorus of voices against me. My affection for him vanished in that instant. I had always believed my husband was a kind person until we began living with my mother-in-law. It became clear that he wasn't kind. He was just weak, easily influenced by those around him, and unable to withstand any form of pressure. During a heated discussion, one of my mother-in-law's brothers took my husband's criticisms to heart and suggested a divorce. To my dismay, everyone seemed to agree. My mother-in-law then offered me a so-called second chance, provided I promised to change and better serve her and my husband in the future. Trying to hold back tears, her siblings urged me to be grateful, claiming I would never find a kinder mother-in-law elsewhere. They even decided to implement a rotating schedule, taking turns each week to check whether I was keeping up with the household chores and attending to my mother-in-law and husband's needs adequately. Once their plans were set, everyone appeared content and decided to celebrate their reunion with a sushi outing. Leaving the house together, as they departed, my mother-in-law couldn't resist a parting shot, instructing me to ensure the house was clean and the laundry done by the time they returned. I was left to wonder how things had escalated to this point. Alone in the cluttered living room, tears began to well up. Our marriage had been happy until my mother-in-law's intrusion. Now, I found myself the subject of complaints from all the relatives despite doing my best. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of sadness, regret, and anger. A few hours later, my husband and mother-in-law came back. I was still sitting in the disarrayed living room. My mother-in-law smirked at me, her words sharp with disdain. "Leave. We don't need a wife who can't do housework. I told you to clean up earlier, didn't I?" Seemingly tipsy, she demanded that I leave immediately. My husband, with a grin on his face, joined in, thinking his support would ensure I complied. Quietly, I had reached my limit and no longer had the desire to exert myself for them. "Fine, I'll leave then," I said calmly as I stood to exit. In the living room behind me, I heard my mother-in-law and husband laughing, probably thinking I was just bluffing. But their reactions didn't matter to me anymore. I went to my room, packed my things, and left the house without another word. About a week later, my mother-in-law called me in a panic. "Andrew says he has no money." "What does that mean?" she asked frantically. I responded with the stark truth. "Andrew earns only a third of what I do. I've been covering most of our expenses, and the house is in my name. I'm planning to sell it, so you'll need to leave soon." She thought I was joking until I urged her to check the bank statements in her drawer. There was silence on the other end of the phone as the reality of the situation set in. Then the pleading began. She apologized, said Andrew was lonely, and begged me to come back. But I was determined, so I told her that I was going to file for divorce through my attorney. I ignored her heartfelt apologies and ended the phone. I filed for divorce with legal aid, citing my mother-in-law's intolerable behavior and my husband's lack of support as justifications. The divorce was approved quickly, and I even got a little payout. My children were understanding when I told them about the circumstances, and they agreed that my husband and his mother were solely to blame. My ex-husband and his mother were obliged to move out after the divorce and temporarily stay with relatives when I sold the house. Their time there was brief since they soon had to move into a tiny apartment as they struggled to make ends meet on his meager salary. They now spend their days blaming each other for their misfortunes, from what I've heard. In the meantime, my spouse has been messaging constantly, requesting a reconciliation and asserting that he no longer has any relationship with his mother. But these communications are more of a bother than anything, so in order to keep my peace, I'm thinking of banning him. I feel freed and prepared to live my life on my terms, putting my personal fulfillment and well-being first, without their unceasing criticism. That day seems like it was yesterday to me. My name is Ava, and that day, even though I was only 6 years old, altered my life forever. Mom and I were alone in our house as Dad had left on another business trip. The doorbell rang when I was in the living room playing with my dolls. Mom hurried to respond, her face beaming with joy upon recognizing the person. She said, "Ava, honey, go to your room and play," her voice trembling with anticipation. I followed her instructions, but my curiosity overcame me. Glancing around the corner, I noticed a tall man that I didn't know. Mom was moving quicker than I had ever seen her move, hurrying to stuff clothes into a suitcase. Mom quickly packed her bag and made her way to the door. I emerged from my hiding place, feeling both afraid and bewildered. I said, "Mommy, where are you going?" She looked away from me as she continued, "Sweetheart, I have to go away for a while. Be a good girl for Daddy, okay?" And then she was gone without warning. Nothing except the sound of a car engine beginning and then dying away. No hug, no kiss, farewell. I waited for her to return while I stood there looking at the locked door, but she never did. The house felt more spacious and empty than it had ever felt. As darkness fell, my fear increased. I reached for the light switches, but my height prevented me from turning on the lights. I felt like the darkness was closing in on me as I began to cry. "Mommy? Daddy?" I called out repeatedly, but nobody answered. I have no idea how many days have gone by. I was dehydrated and hungry, and I could feel demons lurking in the shadows, ready to devour me. I sobbed till my eyes dried out, then cowered down in a corner, trembling in terror. I heard voices outside at last. Mrs. Jeremy, our neighbor, was engaged in conversation. "I've been hearing a child crying for days," she stated. "I'm worried something might have happened." The door flew open, and all of a sudden my dad, the neighbors, and police officers were inside the house. He exclaimed, "Ava," and gathered me into his arms. "Oh God, Ava, I'm so sorry." Weeping with relief over his shoulder, I clung to him. A policeman was carrying a piece of paper as I noticed. "Mr. James, I think you should read this," the policeman stated gravely. Dad let me down gently and picked up the note. His face dropped as he read it. It seemed as though years had gone by in the blink of an eye. "She's gone," he said. "Amy has left. She moved away from us." The following few weeks flew by. Dad came to be with me. He took time off work. We had a full house of visitors, including friends, family, and a kind woman Dad claimed to be a child psychologist. Dad was informed by the psychologist that Ava had experienced trauma. It's normal for her to have some fears and anxieties after what happened. And my anxieties, oh my, were real. Without a light on, I was too afraid of the dark to sleep. Every time Dad had to go, I would freak out because I thought he would not return either. The fear never ever left me. It became an inherent part of my identity, much like my green eyes and brown hair. I became Ava James, the girl who was abandoned by her mother, the girl who was terrified of the dark, and the girl who was terrified of being alone. Days became weeks, and weeks became months, until life began to feel normal once more. Just not the same kind of normal. Dad and I joined forces to navigate this new world without Mom as a team of two. He became proficient at braiding my hair after learning how to do it. He wasn't very good at first. I mastered the art of making his favorite cup of coffee. Then Dad's meeting with Lauren altered everything. He first introduced me to her when I was 8 years old. Lauren immediately put me at ease with her lovely smile and compassionate gaze. Lauren settled into our lives as a regular throughout the ensuing weeks. I couldn't express how much I appreciated that she didn't try to take the place of my mother. Rather, she established her own position inside our small family. I once overheard Dad on the phone with her. "It's probably time, Lauren. Are you going to live with us?" Within a week, Lauren took over. Instead of attempting to be my mother, she developed into a friend, which is equally as significant. She did a great job braiding my hair, assisted me with my homework, and always made sure my room had a nightlight. As the years went by, more changes occurred. After Dad's business took off, we found ourselves in a posh neighborhood and a large new home. I have a private room with a view of the rear pool and a walk-in closet. Still, certain things remained the same. Even so, I used the nightlight to sleep. I used to become nervous whenever Dad went on a business trip, and occasionally I would catch him staring at old pictures of Mom late at night. My 11th birthday began just like any other. Pancakes were Lauren's special birthday present for me, and I woke up to the fragrance of them. Dad had just got home from work, and we were having a little get-together later. Up until the doorbell rang, everything appeared to be ideal. I froze as soon as I entered the living room. My mother was standing there, obviously older than she actually was. Adjacent to her was a young child, perhaps 6 years old, gazing around with big eyes while clutching a teddy bear. "Amy," Dad responded sharply. "What are you doing here?" Mom inhaled deeply. "I sincerely apologize for everything, Larry. I am aware that I have no business being here, however." She gave the young girl a gesture. "My name is Maria. She is your offspring." There was silence in the room. I experienced difficulty breathing. Dad's expression wavered between shock, wrath, incredulity, and something more. "Again, my daughter?" he asked. Mom gave a nod. When I departed, I was expecting. I swear I had no idea at the time. "I've messed up so much, Larry. Maria needs to know who her father is, and I'm not pleading with you for forgiveness." I saw Dad bend over to put himself at the small girl's level. Saying, "Hi, Maria," he spoke quietly. "I'm your dad." Maria timidly glanced up at him. "Hi," she said in a whisper. I saw pale-faced Lauren waiting at the doorway while Dad spoke with Maria. She turned and hurriedly moved on. I wanted to go with her, but I felt immobile. The next few hours were a haze, filled with tears, heated voices, and a lot of adult talks that I wasn't meant to hear. I hid in my room and tried to make sense of everything by putting my knees up against my chest. Dad came over to chat to me later that night. He sat on the edge of my bed and said, "Ava, I know this is a lot to take in. While your mother has made some serious errors, Maria is innocent in all of this. You have a sister named her. For Maria's sake, I've made the decision to give your mom another shot." I observed via my window the following day as Lauren loaded her car. She raised her head to see me staring at her with tears in her eyes. She gave a farewell wave. I returned her wave, feeling as though a piece of myself was going with her. That same day, Mom and Maria moved in. Mom took over her former spot in Dad's room, and Maria occupied the guest room. She felt as though she was wiping out the previous 6 years as if they had never happened. The ensuing years were challenging. My mother had returned, but it was not the joyous family get-together I had imagined. I may have fantasized about being close to my mother when I was younger, but it never truly materialized. She loved Maria dearly and showered her with affection, but there remained a constant barrier between us and an enduring uneasiness. Maria didn't ask to get involved in this complex scenario. She was only a little child. It was difficult, especially when I observed how seamlessly she integrated into Mom and Dad's lives, in a manner that I never seemed to be able to. By the time I turned 19, I was more than ready to leave for college. I decided to study zoology because animals were always easier for me to understand than people. They didn't judge, they didn't have complicated emotions, and they didn't come with messy family histories. They just were. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tightly, his eyes misty. "I'm so proud of you, Ava," he said. "You're going to do great things." Mom gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder and said, "Good luck," but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Maria, now 14, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Finally, I get my own room." I pretended not to hear her and focused on Dad's warm embrace. College was a relief. For the first time, I was away from the tension at home and the constant reminder of my complicated family situation. I threw myself into my studies, finding peace in the world of animals and nature. But even though I did well in school, I struggled socially. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had left a mark. I was quiet, reserved, and always afraid of getting too close to people. What if they left, like Mom had? What if they replaced me, like Maria seemed to have done? Instead, I found comfort at the small zoo on campus, where I volunteered in my spare time, caring for the animals. There was a particularly grumpy old llama named Larry who became my favorite. He didn't like most people, but he seemed to tolerate me. The years at college went by quickly, and before I knew it, I was graduating. As I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. Dad was there, beaming with pride. Mom and Maria were there too, clapping politely. "Congratulations, Iva," Mom said stiffly. "Your father and I have been talking, and well, we think it's time you started looking for your own place. You know, spread your wings." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I looked at Dad, hoping he would disagree with Mom, but he just looked away, his face full of pain. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, I'll start looking right away." The days after my graduation were tense. I was back in my childhood home, but it didn't feel welcoming at all. Dad tried his best to make me feel comfortable, but Mom and Maria made it clear that I was not wanted there. "Ava, have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom would ask during breakfast, her tone pretending to be sweet. "You know it's important to get your foot in the door early." Maria would add with a smirk, "Yeah, and maybe you could find your own place too. It's getting kind of cramped around here." Nights were the hardest. I still needed my nightlight to sleep, something Maria didn't miss. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, she barged into my room. "Seriously," she scoffed, pointing at my nightlight. "You're 23, and you still need that? No wonder you don't have any friends." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Leave me alone, Maria," I muttered, but she wasn't finished. The next day at dinner, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. "Hey, Mom, Dad, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Don't you think Ava should see a therapist or something? I mean, she's an adult who's afraid of the dark and can't make friends. That's not normal, right? Something inside me snapped. Years of bottled up hurt and anger burst out. You want to know why I'm like this, Maria? I said, my voice shaking. It's because when I was 6, my mother left me alone in a dark, empty house for days. Do you have any idea what that does to a child? The table went silent. Dad stared down at his plate, his face full of guilt and pain. Mom's eyes widened in shock and then quickly filled with tears. How dare you? She cried, her voice rising dramatically. How can you be so cruel and vindictive? I've tried so hard to make amends, to be a family again, and this is how you repay me. As Mom continued her tearful rant, Maria smirked triumphantly. I realized something. I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't my home, and these people, they weren't my family. Not really. From that day on, I threw myself into job hunting with new determination. Finally, a glimmer of hope. I had an interview scheduled at a small wildlife rehabilitation center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I left the house that morning feeling cautiously optimistic. But when I arrived, I found a hastily scribbled note on the door. Interviews canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience. Disappointed, I headed home earlier than expected. I unlocked the front door and heard voices coming from the living room, Mom and Maria, deep in conversation. I was about to let them know I was home when I heard my name. If Ava wasn't around at all, Maria was saying, I mean, it's not fair that she gets any of Dad's money. She's not even really part of this family. I know, sweetie, Mom replied in a calming voice, but we have to be patient. Once she moves out, it'll be easier to convince your father to change his will. We just need to keep pushing her to leave. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over me. They didn't just want me out of the house, they wanted me out of the family entirely, and they were after my inheritance too. I sat on my bed, my mind racing. What should I do? Should I tell Dad? But would he believe me over Mom and Maria? He had forgiven Mom for leaving us before, and he loved them both. Maybe he'd take their side. My first bit of luck came when I saw a job posting for the Oklahoma City Zoo. They needed a zoologist to help with their wildlife rehabilitation program. It wasn't a fancy job, but it was exactly what I had been trained for. I sent in my application right away, and to my surprise and happiness, I got called in for an interview. On the day of the interview, I stood in front of the zoo's main gate, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The interview went better than I could have imagined. The head zoologist, Dr. Frank, seemed impressed with my knowledge and passion. You've got the job, Ava, she said with a warm smile. Welcome to the team. I could have cried with relief. Finally, something was going right. Working at the zoo was everything I'd hoped for and more. I spent my days caring for injured wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, and even helping with research projects. In the evenings, I'd return to my tiny apartment, which I was able to rent with the money I saved. To combat loneliness, I started joining online forums for animal lovers and people with similar interests. That's where I met Scott. Scott was from the same city, shared my love for animals, and had a great sense of humor that made me laugh even on my toughest days. We started chatting regularly, sharing stories about our day, and discussing everything from the latest conservation efforts to our favorite books. One day, Scott suggested we exchange photos. With trembling hands, I sent him a recent picture of me at the zoo. He replied with a photo of himself. He had kind eyes and a warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. But as much as I enjoyed our conversations, the idea of meeting in person or even admitting my growing feelings scared me. What if he rejected me once he got to know the real me? What if he left, just like Mom did? Around this time, I started talking with Hannah, a girl I met on a support forum for people with childhood trauma. She understood my fears in a way no one else had before. "You know what helps me?" Hannah wrote. "One day, I write emails to the people I can't talk to in real life. I pour out everything I'm feeling, all the things I wish I could say, but I don't send them. I just save them as drafts. It's really healing." Taking Hannah's advice, I started writing emails to Dad. In them, I told him everything. How I overheard Mom and Maria's conversation, how I was hurt that he didn't seem to notice me anymore, and how I felt like an outsider in my own family. I also started writing to Scott. In these emails, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I couldn't be in our chats. "Scott," I wrote, "I think I'm falling for you, but I'm scared. I'm scared of letting anyone get close to me. I'm scared of being hurt again." These emails too remained unsent, my feelings safely tucked away in my drafts folder. Dad would call occasionally, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. "Ava, honey," he'd say, "why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you." Each time, I'd come up with an excuse. "Sorry, Dad, I've got a big project at work," or "I'm not feeling well this week. Maybe next time." Then one Thursday afternoon, I was at the mall picking up some essentials when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Ava, is that you?" I turned around, and there she was, Lauren, my former stepmother. She looked older, but her kind eyes were just the same. Before I knew it, we were hugging, years of separation melting away in an instant. That's when I noticed a young boy standing beside her, looking up at us curiously. "This is my nephew, Justin," Lauren explained, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "I'm raising him now." Lauren's voice was soft. "My sister passed away last year." Over coffee, Lauren filled me in on her life after she and Dad split up. She had been on her own until her sister's death left Justin in her care. After that, we started meeting regularly, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Justin. One day, Lauren called and urgently asked me to look after Justin for the evening. Justin arrived at my apartment, backpack and towel. As I prepared dinner in my tiny kitchen, I could hear him tapping away on my laptop in the living room. I told him he could play the games if he finished his homework. When I came out of the kitchen with 2 plates of spaghetti, I found Justin looking guilty, his face pale. "Ava," he said, his voice trembling, "I did something bad. I was curious. And I saw these emails in your drafts folder, and I sent them, all of them. I'm so sorry." The world seemed to spin around me. Those emails, my private thoughts, my deepest feelings, had been sent out into the world, to Dad and to Scott. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, after Justin left, I lay in bed, my mind racing. What would Dad think? And Scott, oh God, Scott. My phone pinged with a message notification. It was from Scott, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. What if he was disgusted by my feelings? What if he never wanted to speak to me again? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Ava," he said, his voice serious. "We need to talk." Can you meet me at the cafe near your old high school? My heart pounded as I sat across from Dad in the small cafe. He looked tired, his face showing lines I hadn't noticed before. I got your emails, he said quietly. Ava, I had no idea you were feeling this way. About your mother, about Maria, about everything. I couldn't meet his eyes, feeling a mix of shame and fear inside me. Ava, look at me, Dad said, his voice gentle but firm. I looked up, surprised to see tears in his eyes. I love you more than anything in this world. I'm so sorry. I made you feel like you weren't important to me. That was never, ever my intention. We talked for hours. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. We talked about Mom's return, about Maria, and about how I had felt pushed aside and forgotten. Dad listened, really listened, occasionally wiping away a tear. Finally, he stood up. I need some time to process all this, he said, but Ava, we're going to figure this out. You and me. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mix of relief and nervousness. What was going to happen now? But I didn't have much time to think about it, because my phone rang again. It was Scott. Ava, he said, his voice warm but a little nervous. I got your email, and I feel the same way. I've been too scared to say it, but I really like you. Would you like to meet for coffee? My heart soared. Yes, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I'd love to. The next day, I met Scott at a small coffee shop. He was even more handsome in person, with a kind smile that put me at ease right away. We talked for hours about our fears, dreams, and pasts. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. As the autumn leaves began to fall, my phone rang one crisp morning. It was Dad. Ava, he said, his voice warm, but with something serious underneath. I'd like you to come to Thanksgiving dinner. It's important to me that you're there. Something in his tone made me agree. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I stood on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Scott had offered to come with me for support, but I felt this was something I needed to face on my own. Mom opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Ava, how nice of you to join us. Maria, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from her phone. Oh, you came. Dad emerged from the kitchen and hugged me warmly. I'm glad you're here, sweetheart, he whispered. As we sat down to dinner, the tension was thick. Mom and Maria exchanged glances, their smiles forced and fake, but Dad seemed unusually calm. Just as Mom started to serve Oklahoma, Dad cleared his throat. Before we begin, there's something we need to discuss, he stated. He extracted a big manila folder from behind his chair by reaching down. Dad started setting papers out on the table. Amy Maria, he replied, I've known for a while that something wasn't right, so I did some investigating. A bank statement was held up by him. First, I discovered regular withdrawals from our accounts that I didn't make. Quite substantial amounts, in fact. Mama's face went pale, and all of a sudden, Maria was fascinated by her dish. Dad went on, taking out a second document. I also employed Amy, a private investigator. He gave you photographic proof of your meetings at the motel in Oklahoma City with a certain individual. Mom let out a gasp and reached for her mouth. Hey, Larry, I could provide an explanation. But Dad was far from done. His hand trembling a little, he took out one last document. I had a DNA test done, Dad muttered. Maria isn't my biological daughter. There was silence in the room. Maria let go of her phone, which fell to the ground with a crash. Mom appeared as if she could pass out. Dad said, maintaining a steady tone despite the emotion in his eyes. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," he added. "Amy, I'm filing for divorce, and I'm afraid I'll have to ask both you and Maria to leave this house." Mom spoke up again, her shock giving way to rage. "This is not something you can accomplish. I'll accept you for everything that you possess." Dad's face became stern. "You won't, Amy, in reality. I'll countersue you and demand that you return all of the money you've taken, plus the money I spent raising Maria, if you try to claim any property. I have a very solid case, my lawyer tells me." As Mom realized how bad the situation was, tears fell down her face. As her life crumbled around her, Maria sat in startled stillness. Over the next few days, Mom and Maria moved out. My father and I started to mend our relationship, and now it's stronger than ever. We began having long discussions, dinners every week, and even started organizing a road trip as father and daughter. Dad mentioned Lauren hesitantly one day with coffee. He confessed, "I've been thinking a lot about the past and the mistakes I made. I apologized to Lauren over email. We've been getting together over coffee to discuss various issues." Sincerely glad for him, I smiled. "That's fantastic, Dad. Lauren is a very remarkable woman." For my part, my relationship with Scott was going more smoothly than I could have ever dreamed. He was kind, understanding, and patient with my fears and insecurities. I was even beginning to work through my problems in therapy with his help.